try to stay away from on Shabbat because, sort of negates the atmosphere of Shabbat, as we said. Quoting the verses in Nehemiah, how he fought against the commerce on Shabbat. And maybe you'd come to write something down like you usually do when you do business, so you try to avoid it. So even giving gifts actually is prohibited on Shabbat. Sometimes the rabbi has a problem because it's a bar mitzvah and there's a custom that the community gives a gift to the bar mitzvah boy. How can you give him the gift? It's Shabbat. Shabbat morning when everybody comes to celebrate. So there's a few tricks. One is that there are many times the rabbi will say, this will become yours after Shabbat. I'm giving it to you now, but it's still not yours yet. It's not yours until Shabbat ends. And so we sort of avoid the transactional mechanism on Shabbat. Or also when you bring a gift, food, to a host family on Shabbat, really. Some say that if it's a gift, it's allowed, but another way of doing it is just you allow them to eat from your food. It doesn't have to be a gift to them. There's actually possession changing hands, but you could be sharing. And sharing is caring, don't we know? Right? Good morning, Shmuel. Just get the door for me, please. It's a little chilly. So one other type of thing, which is sort of like too businesslike, believe it or not, is court matters. So a Jewish court does not sit on Shabbat. You're not going to be able to just do convert on Shabbat, even though you might think, this is a holy religious event. No, not. We don't. The court doesn't sit. And also, here's something a little bit very useful that you're going to learn right now, and that is the laws of Truma and Maaser. So, in general, the rabbi said you're not allowed to separate the tithes from the food. We'll learn more about it, I think, in a couple months after Hanukkah, between Hanukkah and Purim. Right? There's Tu B'Shvat. Tu B'Shvat, we generally speak about the fruit and the various fruits of the land of Israel. We take the opportunity to learn some of the laws of brachot as well, but we'll see. Hopefully, we'll get in a little because it's a leap year. We have an extra month. Maybe we'll be able to learn some laws of kashrut. One of the laws of kashrut that you may not be aware of if you come from Chutz La'aretz, and that is, it's not enough to know that they don't have any non-kosher ingredients, that they don't have any items made from shellfish and things like that, or meat and milk mixed together. Here in Israel, there's a whole other branch of the laws of kashrut, and that is that the produce is not kosher. If you grow a vegetable, a tomato, or a cucumber in Sweden, you pick it up out of the ground, you bring it into your home, and you make a bracha, and you have a nice meal. That's kosher. You can, anywhere in the world, you can go and you can eat kosher food. Why? Because you can eat fruits and vegetables. And in most places in the world, that's it. You just grow them and they're kosher. You make a bracha. There's no problem. Here in the land of Israel, we have special mitzvot with the produce that you have to take off a certain section and give it to the Kohen, to the Levi, or to the poor people. All sorts of in-kind donations that we have to give from the produce. And therefore, until those donations are given off, some eat them by Torah law. By Torah law, you may be. So you have to be really careful about produce and land only buy it. Sure, certification, and there's a rabbi who makes sure that all the produce that they sell, every Sufrisal, and what other big chain is there in Israel? Oh, sure. Yochananov, all those, they're all been tithed, they're all kosher. Many of them have been tithed a few times because the farmer does it, and then the wholesaler does it, and then the retailer does it, just to be sure. Nobody wants in the chain till it finally gets to your plate. Most of it's been tithed. However, I have a little garden in my backyard, and if I don't tithe it, nobody's going to tithe it for me. And sometimes you buy food at a supermarket where you're not sure that there's, like this Shabbat. This Friday, I went to visit my son all the way up north, and we came back like an hour before Shabbat. So we bought Shabbat, but where did we buy everything we needed to eat? We bought, the meat but we also bought some fruits and vegetables. It was just a supermarket on the way, and I don't know if it had supervision or not. And so before Shabbat entered, we took off some tithes. I'll teach you exactly how to do that. But basically, you have to, cut off, 1%, a little bit more than 1% of the fruit or the vegetables, each type. If you buy cucumbers, a little bit of cucumber. Buy apples, a little bit of apples, etc. You cut off a little bit of each type, and you say a certain text which designates these as, Truma, Maaser, Maaser Rishon, Maaser Sheni. There's a lot of different tithes that we take off, and then you set it aside. Nowadays, the Kohanim and the Leviim are not working in the temple. Usually, the Kohanim are not pure either, so they can't partake of some of this stuff, the Truma, for example. And so we wrap it up and we pretty much throw it out. We're not allowed to eat it. He's not allowed to eat it. There's not much we can do with it, but it does make the rest of the fruits kosher. So this process of separating off the tithes, so we did it this Friday afternoon for the stuff we bought in an unknown supermarket. It wasn't one of the big chains. It could be they got straight from the farmer their produce, and nobody took off Truma Maser. So just to be safe, we didn't say a bracha. Usually when you do this, you say a bracha. It's a mitzvah to separate. But since it was doubtful, whenever it's a doubt, you don't say a bracha. So it was a doubt, we took off, because some of them, they're even the small supermarkets, they're getting from a wholesaler. And the wholesalers are usually under supervision, and it's hard to know. So anyways, you take off some Truma and Maaser without a bracha. But we had to make sure to do it, even though we came an hour before Shabbat, less than an hour. And what did I have to do getting ready for Shabbat at the last minute? Well, give me an example. What are the things you have to do in your house before the sun sets? Set the timers. What else? Prepare the candles. I had to set up the candles for my wife to light. What else?
Turn off the light in the fridge.
That's right. Turn off the light in the fridge. Excellent. That's right. These are all the things we had to remember quickly before. And I had to boil up the hot water. I like to have my tea, as you know. L'chaim, l'chaim. So you can't have the hot tea on Shabbat unless you have the hot water boiled from before Shabbat. So that's one other thing. So here we had one more thing to do. That's to separate the Truma and Maaser, because we don't do that on Shabbat. The sages said you're not allowed to fix. It's like fixing things, which we don't do on Shabbat. So we don't. Metakein mana. It's a rabbinic prohibition on something which was not fit to eat. You couldn't eat it unless you took off the tithes. So you can't do that on Shabbat. So you have to do that before Shabbat. So we did, and there's a short formula. I'll show it to you in a second inside. You don't have to say all the details exactly. This section will be Truma, this section will be Maaser. You can just say, I'm going to separate off the requisite tithes based on what it says in the Sidur, or if you have a page. We have sometimes on the fridge, we have a page which is the procedure for taking off tithes. And you just say, I'm separating based on this text. That's good enough. And as long as you separate it off before Shabbat, you're good to go. What happens though if you didn't? Or, I'll give you another example. Let's say you go to visit someone's home in the Chusha, just for example. And they keep kosher, but you don't know if they know all the laws of kosher. Maybe they bought their vegetables at a farmer's market. Maybe they went straight to the manufacturer. And nobody tithes the produce. So usually it's a doubt, because usually, the most produce is bought through wholesalers, which are supervised. So, but many situations there are things of doubt, and sometimes you might have even you don't have time. There's no the sun is about to set, and you don't have time to separate the tithes now. And maybe you know what, you're not near the fruit. Maybe you're in shul already, and you remember, oh, I went to the shuk and I bought all sorts of things, and I forgot to take off the tithes, and now you're already in shul, and the sun's about to set. What do? So there is a workaround, a loophole, which take a look on page 138. I want to show it to you here. It can be useful also if you're a guest at someone's house and you think maybe they don't know the laws of tithing. So you can separate on their behalf when it's doubtful. Page 138. Page 138, that's chapter 22, section 5 in the middle. The second paragraph, it says Truma and Maser, the first one from the top of the page. Page 138, Truma and Maser and Chala, you see it? Page 138. The paragraph starts with the words Teruma and Maser.
I've got immersing and measuring on Shabbat.
That's 139. It's silly. Yeah. 138 is what we're looking for, and the paragraph there starts Truma, Maser, and Chala. So Truma and Maser, two of the tithes. Chala is another tithe. What is that? What is challah? Challah is special bread for Shabbat, but in this context, it has a second meaning. When you bake bread, you must separate a little bit of the dough and give it to the Kohen. Nowadays, the Kohen's not pure, you're not pure, the dough is not pure, so we just, like I said, we separate it, we say this is challah. It's called, the separated challah is called challah, not the final product that we eat. It's just a second meaning for but it's a tithe. You have to separate it from the dough in order to make the dough kosher and make the bread kosher. So in all the bakeries that you buy, they have to have kosher supervision, and a rabbi goes around and he makes sure that they have doughs of hundreds of kilos at a time. They make, or at least tens of kilos, and each dough they separate off a little bit and they burn it. Really, should be burned ideally, because as I said, we're not pure, and it's something that has to be eaten when it's pure. So this is challah. So truma, maser, and challah are three different things that we separate off. The truma and maser is from the fruit and vegetables, and the challah is from the dough. But we don't do it on Shabbat. So if you made a bread and you forgot to take off the dough, you can take off a piece of bread, but not on Shabbat, because that's too much like fixing or like commerce. And so what do? You can't eat your food. Your food's not kosher. You won't have any food on Shabbat. So Rav Melamed says, will you read it, Shmuel, for us? Truma, Maser, and Chala?
Teruma, Maaser, and Chala may not be set aside on Shabbat, because setting them aside resembles dedicating them to God. Additionally, it looks like one is fixing or improving the produce, Beitzah and Mishon Torah. If one made a mistake and unknowingly set them aside, the remaining produce may be eaten on Shabbat. In contrast, if he did this knowingly, although the action is effective and the remaining produce may be eaten, no Jew may eat it until after Shabbat. Tirumot and Mishnah Berurah. One who is considered that he will not
concerned
who is concerned that he will not have time to separate Terumah and Maaser before Shabbat may recite the formula for the separation before Shabbat, but without a beracha. By doing so, he has begun the process of separation. Then, after Shabbat begins, he may tithe in the normal fashion and recite beracha. This procedure may also be followed if one is concerned that he will not have time to set aside chal. Only the owner of the produce may separate Terumah and Maaser on Shabbat by means of the procedure described in the previous paragraph. It is not effective for anyone else. If a guest is concerned that his host may forget to tithe, he may ask the host before Shabbat to appoint him a shaliach, a proxy to tithe on his behalf. The guest may then recite the formulation before Shabbat and perform the actual tithing on Shabbat.
Continue to the footnote, please. Number one, when I wrote above,
the shliach may tithe on Shabbat by means of this procedure. This applies to cases where the produce definitely has not been tithed yet, the vet. However, if it is uncertain whether the produce was tithed, demai, someone else can tithe this way as well, Orot Shabbat. The formula recited before Shabbat is the usual one, but all the words should be changed to future tense. For example, what will I tithe? What I will tithe, as on each demai, as quoted in on Shabbat. B'diavad, if one simply says, whatever I separate tomorrow should be considered Roman Maaser, he has fulfilled his obligation. He has begun the process of separation before Shabbat.
Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata. So what he says is that basically, if you go to someone's house or you're invited to a kiddush at someone's house, or they pick you up at shul, does that ever happen to you? That you think you're going to eat in the yeshiva, and then someone says, "Come on over, have something by tea." But you're a little suspect because you don't know if they're so careful about kosher. Could be, happens. Depends on the community. Here in Kiryat Moshe, they're very religious people, but mostly. But it's a big country, and a lot of people are not everybody studied in Machon Meir. Unfortunately, there's still a few seats. If they're interested, we can fill them up. But if you're worried that someone is not keeping kosher, so you won't eat the meat, but maybe the fruits and vegetables you can have. Well, you got this problem. What about the tithing? Maybe they brought from a farmer. You're not, you can't really ask them now. Now it's already Shabbat. So what you can do is, or if you know that you're going over to someone's house where you have a doubt, say the sentence before. The sentence is right here at the bottom. Whatever I separate tomorrow should be considered truma and maaser. That's it. You don't have to know or actually recite the entire text. The entire text is longer. I'll teach it to you, Bezrat Hashem, at a later date. But if you just say, like I said, I'm hereby separating truma and maaser, or what I will be separating truma and maaser tomorrow when it's Shabbat, based on what it says in the Siddur, based on the full text, that's good enough. And then when you receive your food, you can separate off 1% of the tomatoes, 1% of the cucumbers, 1% of the fruit, whatever it is that you feel might not be tithed, and you're tithing it now. You can eat. You don't even have to say anything. You just separate it off. Some people even allow you to leave it off at the end, as you have your plate of food, and you don't finish it. I know your mother says you should always finish your plate. It's impolite. But you can always leave off one little, cube of cucumber, one little slice of lettuce. Whatever it is, if you leave some aside, that in your mind you're designating as truma and maaser, just in case. It's a case where you're not sure that it hasn't been done. That works even if it's not your own produce. And so some people, like Shmirat Shabbat Kilchata, it says that before Shabbat, if you think you're going to be a guest somewhere, it's some host who you're not sure if they're doing Truma and Maaser, you can just say every Shabbat, whatever I do tomorrow will be considered Truma and Maaser, and then you're not actually starting the process on Shabbat, and that's a pro tip for you if you're in a situation where you think you might have a trouble with the host, or with being given produce which has not been tithed. You wanted to ask,
Are we not violating the border in this case?
Good question. So, yes and no. First of all, if you leave it for the end, you're not separating it off. You're eating the good from the bad, right? If you leave it for the end, and that's why some people suggest you do that. But even if you want to separate it before you start to eat, you're not really taking something bad. You're separating it for truma and maaser. At that stage, it's not considered a psolet. It's not considered something bad. You want to set it aside so that it's going to be truma maaser. So at that moment, for you, it's ochel, and then you're eating the rest of it. You're not going to eat that part that you separated. But I think that's the way they get around it. But it's a good question. Hopefully, you'll make sure that all the food that you eat is kosher before Shabbat starts. And Baruch Hashem, we remembered on Friday afternoon, just before Shabbat, it was a doubt whether or not the fruits and vegetables we bought at this supermarket were kosher, but 95% of the supermarkets in Israel are all supervised. The produce comes from a clearinghouse, which has been supervised by the rabbi, so it's all good. Yeah.
Last question. What if I been like hosted by a family and then they make like fruit salad? It's already been in the bowl. And
It's already been what?
it's already been in the bowl and you didn't
Yeah,
know.
in the bowl. Yeah. So.
You didn't know if they are.
Well, first of all, most cases you're trusting the family's kashrut, right? If they're religious people, for sure, you're trusting that they know what they're doing. But if you do have a doubt, if they have, a tree in the backyard with apples and say they give you some apple salad and say, look, this is from our tree, and maybe they don't know that you have to tithe the fruit from their tree. So the truth is, a lot of people know, but if you suspect that they don't, so then you can very discreetly, you don't have to ask them, you don't have to confront them, you don't have to accuse them, you don't have to suspect them, but if you want to, separate off a little bit of the apples that you eat and designate it as Truma and Maaser. Now, if you haven't said the formulation before Shabbat, that's a problem. That's a problem. Some say you can do it in your mind by leaving it over, even if you hadn't said the formulation before Shabbat. But I'd have to look that up to see. Definitely wouldn't do that on a regular basis. Regular basis, you should, if there's some don't worry about it. But it's fine to ask questions if you're concerned. Home from their tree or something. So I asked them, did you take? But if in most cases they say, yes, we know, people who have enough produce to give away have usually confronted, this issue of kashrut. Like I was saying now recently for the soldiers, a lot of people want to cook for the soldiers. Restaurants have turned themselves kosher. They made themselves kosher, and so people are aware that there is kashrut issues with fruits and vegetables, and they know that rabbi has to. Doesn't have to be a rabbi, but they know that there's a procedure that has to be done. But when you're concerned, separate it off yourself. The tricky part is when it's Shabbat, and then you're really not allowed to separate Truma and Maaser on Shabbat. But in a case where it's a doubt, it's not for sure, you're not making a bracha, you are just, covering yourself. For a case of doubt, you can be lenient and separate it off from the side, and then you won't eat that part, and that'll be the Truma. Generally, you will be hosted by people who are Shomer Shabbat and Shomer Kashrut, and most people buy their fruits and vegetables at the supermarket where it's all kosher. So, but there is something you should be aware of. It's here. I figured I'll share it with you. But if you do have a specific question about a specific circumstance where you know that I'm hosted by this family and I don't know what to do, you please consult with me. But no question about it. There's room to relate to specific cases based on their specifics. Okay, let's continue. I want to go skip to page 140 now. 140. A lot of people have a regular exercise routine. And since we're not allowed to work on Shabbat, but this is not work. This is relaxing. We're not allowed to use our electronics. We're not allowed to watch the news. Or we don't want to be doing mundane things. Taking a nature walk is a very common activity for leisure on Shabbat. So, are you allowed to do that? Why could it be problematic? So, if we look on page 140, section 7, Shmuel, you want to read for us? Walking, running, and jumping?
Running and jumping. The world we live in is full of shortcomings. To perfect it, we rush around all week long, working and exerting ourselves in a variety of ways. However, on Shabbat, which is like the world to come, we are commanded to cease all work and act as as if everything has already been perfected, with no further need to rush away. We are meant simply to delight in the holiness of Shabbat and take a faith-filled look at the perfect inner essence of the world as God created it. There is a mitzvah to express this spiritual perspective by walking at a leisurely pace on Shabbat. Thus the sages expound, not go in your own way. The way you walk on Shabbat should not be like the way you walk on weekdays. Therefore, running is prohibited on Shabbat, as is striding. This prohibition applies to one who is going somewhere for his own sake, in which case he should walk at a leisurely pace to honor Shabbat. However, if one is going to attend a Torah class or to pray, it is a mitzvah for him to run. But of course, because running for the sake of a mitzvah does not detract from the honor due Shabbat. On the contrary, it expresses the spirit of Shabbat, which allows us to rest from the troubles of this world. This peacefulness in turn encourages us to serve God. One may run and jump if one benefits greatly from it. For example, one may run in order to get out of the rain, and one may jump over a puddle to avoid dirtying his shoes. One may also run in order to watch something enjoyable. Children and teens who enjoy running may participate in games that involve running, since this type of running is pleasurable rather than burdensome. Adults may jump for pleasure as part of playing with small children.
Okay, so this, as you can see, the definitions are a little bit looser than what we were used to when we talked about the 39 categories of work, of plowing or writing or harvesting or cooking. We had very precise definitions. Here, it's part of the changing the way you walk, like we saw in the pasuk in Yeshayahu, that don't go on your way the way you normally do on Shabbat. But if there's a good reason, for the sake of a mitzvah, you're allowed to run. But in general, we do want the Shabbat atmosphere to be one of accepting what the world as it is and appreciating it. And running is usually against that. That's something associated with our mundane rat race of the weekdays. What about people who want to work out? You want to run for exercise. I started to say many people exercise every day, and it's part of their routine, and it actually hurts when they don't exercise. You ever been in a routine like that? Hope you exercise. Do you exercise? Do you exercise? Everybody should do some exercise. I've been really bad in the last few months. Maybe because, I don't know, I can make excuses, but in the summertime I would swim regularly. We have a pool in Tekoa, a communal pool, so we have a subscription there, and that's great. I love that exercise. But in the winter I always have trouble because I don't enjoy running, jogging so much. I mean, I do. When I do it, I sometimes do, and I put on some music in the earphones or a shir. Sometimes I listen to a shir as I run and exercise, but I've been too caught up. I think probably this war, but there's many excuses. I don't before the war, it was a holiday. I don't know. There's always excuses for not exercising. But there's a fellow here who really recently, one of our students, who took it upon himself to be regular, and he's finding that it helps him study harder, helps him feel healthier. 2 or 3 times a week, I can't remember what he told me, but he goes up to the roof here, and there's a set of weights, free weights, and you can do stretches and all sorts of exercises. It's really a good idea. There's all sorts of stories about how the rabbis would make time to go out and exercise. The greatest rabbis, who you might think it's incongruous. Even Rabbi Gon here, now he's gotten really elderly, and it's hard for him even to walk. But for many years, he had in his office a walker, a treadmill.
It's still there.
It's still there. I don't think he uses it much, but most people who have a treadmill, they don't use it much. That's the nature of the beast. In any case, it's good to exercise. It helps you learn better, especially when you're studying Torah. And but what about Shabbat? Shabbat comes and your body wants its daily dose of adrenaline or stretching, and sometimes. So I see in my yeshuv, it's amazing. Right after Havdalah, Motzei Shabbat, everybody's out running. It's like I'm on a gym. It's like a circuit. People wait. They don't exercise on Shabbat. So Motzei Shabbat is the time. You would probably eat a little more than you wanted to on Shabbat, the yummy foods. And so if you're watching your weight, you want to work off some of those calories. Anyways, I think a lot of people want to exercise on Motzei Shabbat. But what about Shabbat itself? Let's say you wake up every morning and you do yoga. It's a form of exercise. And it's a very healthy practice. It's of course a physical practice. It could also be a spiritual practice. Yoga, like the special stretches and special ways that you pay attention to each part of your body, or just some calisthenics. Some people, they want to make sure that they don't get weak, so they do 100 push-ups every night. So or some sit-ups, just the basic stuff. You don't have to go to the gym for an hour and have a whole trainer, and there's that's good too. That's good too. It's very good to, they say it's healthy. What do they, I think the nutritionists and the health authorities say? You should always raise your heart rate 3 times a week, right? So either running or working out with weights or whatever it is, but aerobic exercise is good for the heart. The heart disease is the biggest killer, I believe, in Western society. All around the world, heart disease. And what keeps the heart healthy is aerobic exercise. So, everybody's looking down and looking a little bit ashamed and says, I haven't been so good at this. We need to get better at it. Don't think it's bittul Torah. It is necessary. It's part of keeping a healthy body is a mitzvah. So we have to be better at it. And I'm including myself. And I'm going to try to think of an exercise. Maybe I'll ride my bike. Can you ride your bike on Shabbat for exercise? Well, we talked about it before that it might, rabbinically, most rabbis didn't allow riding a bicycle because it's against the spirit of Shabbat. That's the name of our chapter. But what about, exercising in any other way? Is that allowed? So we're going to see here what he says. But first the question, yeah.
Walking.
Yeah.
Is allowed in Shabbat.
So we just read about it, that walking is allowed for the sake of at a leisurely pace. We're supposed to change the way we walk during the week from the way we walk on Shabbat. But what about if your exercise is walking? Walking is a very healthy exercise. You should go for a walk. In the middle of the day, you can walk just out a few blocks out, you have a forest. Yeah, just down the road. Just down the road. Also in Beit HaKerem, in that direction also. There's Jerusalem forest is not far away. It's a wonderful thing to go and spend some time in nature and to move the body, even if you're not going to be putting on your sneakers and shorts and really working out. Going for a walk is so healthy. So can you do that on Shabbat? So if it's a regular leisurely pace, yes. What if you walk like some people? A power walk. You see, like they're moving their arms, and you can tell that they're walking for exercise. Is that allowed? So let's read about it. He says here, on section 8, page 141. Okay, Idan, you want to read a little?
One may not run for exercise on Shabbat because it is burdensome rather than pleasurable. Even though people who work out enjoy it, this enjoyment derives from their awareness that they are taking care of their health and physical fitness, not from the exercise itself. Even one who is very fit, runs every day, and enjoys it may not run on Shabbat because it is a weekday activity. It will appear to others that he is belittling Shabbat and treating it like a weekday. However,
Okay, so basically, stop here. He says, no, you cannot exercise on Shabbat. Exercising. There was a few rabbis last year put out an article, and they said, well, if you really do it every day and you're going to be in pain because your body is craving that adrenaline, that exercise that you're used to, if you don't put on your workout clothes, to keep on your Shabbat clothes, and take that brisk walk or something, they say it can be allowed because it's not ruining the atmosphere of Shabbat. But you see, there's an issue here because it's a weekday activity working out. It's not something naturally associated with a holy day, with rest. It's working out is actually already in the Mishnah. It's mentioned as something prohibited on Shabbat. There they were talking about specifically when you work up a sweat, or getting a massage where you're purposely working on the body so that it improves, and it can even be painful sometimes. That is prohibited for sure. But this type of exercise, for the sake of exercise, Rav Melamed is very machmir here. He says, do not do that on Shabbat. It's like treating Shabbat like a weekday, and you're not allowed to exercise on Shabbat. However, he does give a little bit of allowances. Go ahead.
However, one who enjoys exercise may jump or work out for pleasure inside his home on condition that he does not overexert himself, does not follow regimen, and does not use special equipment, any of which would be deemed a weekday activity.
Okay, so he says, if you're just gonna, stretch a little bit, I feel I need to, shake my muscles around a little bit, or to jump 10 times. That's okay, but don't do a proper workout, is what he's saying, because that's a weekday activity. And if you want to jump around a little bit with your children or grandchildren, that's he already said earlier, that's fine. It's part of pleasure. That's not an exercise routine. That's what he means to say. That's considered to be a weekday activity, and it makes sense. It's hard to define, 10 jumping jacks are okay, but not 15? Like what exactly defines an exercise routine as opposed to just, stretching your muscles? So they're hard to define, but I think you get the idea, is that this is not the day for a proper workout, but, just to stretch a little bit. If every morning you stretch for, 5 minutes before you daven, you wake up and you touch your toes, and people do different things, or you stretch your legs. So I think you could do that on Shabbat too. That's not considered a workout of you're exercising for health. That's just sort of waking your body up and being healthy. So, and there's no special equipment, and so that's allowed, but it's a fine line. Now playing ball, go ahead. One may not.
One may not play ball for the same reason. Even children may not play ball. May not play with the ball that adults use for sports because it is a weekday.
This is playing ball. This is become a political issue, believe it or not. Because, especially here in Israel. Because, in Israel, until a couple of years ago, there's a 6-day work week. There still is a 6-day work week for many people in the market, in the economy, but Fridays now are sometimes off, or half days, and there's school in some places not on Fridays. So, but the concept is that most Israelis, they work 6 days a week, and Shabbat is the one day off. There's no Sundays, is what I'm trying to say. And therefore, the custom has been, I'm going back 100 years before the state existed, when the Jews came to Israel, they even though they made Shabbat a special day of rest, for many people who were disenfranchised from religion, Shabbat became the day for soccer, for sports, and not only for fun, but also for professional sports, for amateur and professional leagues, teams, games. When do you have time to make events where people can watch? And Shabbat became the day for soccer. And the rabbis were very upset at that. And they say, you're turning Shabbat into a day of football. That's not what Shabbat's supposed to be. That is not, so the rabbis were very, very vocal about this. And until today, it's still a problem, because the national leagues and professional sports, most of them, they are on Shabbat. Shabbat is the day where there's 2 or 3 league games and playoff games, and And so sometimes it works out because, if it's a sport that's played in the evening, like basketball, so then it's after Shabbat ends. But if it's Friday night, that's a problem. And then there's what the problem is, what about athletes who want to keep Shabbat? Not all the athletes are secular. So you have really a religious boy, grows up, he is very good at his sport, and he wants to continue, but then you get to the leagues, and he has to play on Shabbat. He doesn't want to play the sports on Shabbat. So it's discriminatory to have these games only on Shabbat. So there's a battle. There's a battle going on now in Israeli society, maybe to move the soccer games from Shabbat to Friday or to weekdays, whatever it is. But it's very ingrained. It's very deep. It's been over 100 years like this, that Shabbat is associated with Kaduregel. And throughout the world, it's like that. It's Shabbat. Saturday is the day for sports. It's a problem. So you're not allowed to play sports on Shabbat, and so that's what he's referring to, playing ball. Playing ball, it's considered to be a weekday type of activity. Some rabbi said you could find the reason why it's prohibited because, right, the field, usually play football in a yard, and the yard has to be flat. Flattening out a yard is like plowing. It's a problem. You're preparing the field for that. That's one of the agricultural prohibitions. Not only that, they said, well, you play soccer, sometimes the ball gets punctured and you would maybe fix it. So whatever it is, and wait a minute, what if there's no eruv? Then you're transferring the ball. That's an object. You're carrying it from one place to another. Throwing it or kicking it is the same thing. So you cannot play ball on Shabbat for so many reasons. Besides the major reason, which is it's just not in the atmosphere of Shabbat. But it's a challenge because there's no other day to play in Israeli, the way the economy has been set up and the way the leagues have been set up. So it's a big challenge. But definitely it's a touchy issue because even if you say, okay, I'm going to play only on asphalt. Okay, so there's no problem of digging holes. And I'm going to play only with a ball which never gets punctured. Most balls today don't get a puncture. And I'm going to play within an enclosed area where even if there's no eruv here, it's a Rishut HaYachid. And so you can cover all your bases in terms of violating the actual laws of the malachot of Shabbat. And you're going to say, well, I just want to enjoy myself. It's Shabbat. Shabbat is a time for leisure, and this is my leisure activity. I get together with a few buddies, we have a few beers, and we kick the ball around. What's the problem with that? The answer is, it's not the right atmosphere of Shabbat. But you are covering a lot of bases, like if you're aware of all those things. It's hard to say that it's absolutely prohibited. It's prohibited from this idea, uvdin dechol, the spirit of Shabbat. It's against the spirit of Shabbat. It's nice to see friends, but not with playing ball. And then, of course, the problem as well with children. Children, we're going to speak about children. It's a whole other chapter. What do you deal with children on Shabbat? Children, it's very hard. What are they going to do all day? They play. They can't read. They can't learn. They can't. Usually they're not trained to do that, and they need more exercise than adults do. They need to jump around and kick a ball around as a normal type of activity. So there's some flexibility. We'll see. As I said, it's a separate chapter. But before bar mitzvah, when they're little kids, obviously you can't expect that much of them. But once they get older, you really should be trained that Shabbat is not a day for soccer. You play your sports on Motzei Shabbat or on Friday or during the week. But it's a little bit of a political issue because there's this fight going on about, and in Israeli culture for 100 years ago when it was started, it was always a touchy issue because soccer was being played on Shabbat, and let alone the fact that for religious Jews to see the youth playing soccer, wasting their time instead of learning in the Beit Midrash, learning in yeshiva. There's the whole fight between the religious and secular culture. What do we put on a pedestal? Do we, what's the most, to be a healthy, strong, and athlete, or to be the Talmud scholar, to be the Torah, someone who's involved in the books? So there's sort of like a culture clash here between these. It's not. That's why I say this issue of playing ball on Shabbat is a lot of politics, besides the actual laws in Hilchot Shabbat. Maybe in the footnote he talks upon that a little bit. But yeah, question. Yeah.
Shabbat is also a day of joy.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that brings me joy. So you could say, I want to do it because I want to be happy on Shabbat. That's my leisure. That's my entertainment. Still, I don't think that cuts it because doesn't cut the grade because there's an atmosphere of Shabbat, a spirit of Shabbat that we're trying to foster. It's not all about whatever you enjoy, you're allowed. Whatever you don't enjoy, you're not allowed. That doesn't work that way. First of all, we have the rules, the 39 categories of work. And second of all, there's the Shabbat is not only a day of rest, it's a day of holiness. A day of holiness. So the spirit of Shabbat that we're trying to foster has a specific content to it as well. It's not just about enjoyment.
No. It's not. Drink also is joy.
Yeah, you could, yeah.
It's not part of the game, but I don't know how to put it, but you are supposed to enjoy the Sabbath.
Right. So you have to find things that you can enjoy without violating the melachot of Shabbat or the spirit of Shabbat. And maybe we do have to train ourselves to enjoy other things. I enjoy watching TV. So you sit on Shabbat all day long. Oh, okay, I'll turn it on from before Shabbat. I'll just watch Netflix for 24 hours. That's my enjoyment. So Shabbat is not only about enjoyment. We're supposed to enjoy the Shabbat, not just enjoy our egotistical pleasures or our habits. Enjoyment of the Shabbat includes some spiritual, some physical enjoyment, as we've been talking about, but it's not just a day of enjoyment. It's a different attitude towards Shabbat. People who didn't grow up with it, people not educated towards it, Shabbat to them can it's the weekend. In secular cultures, sometimes people don't even say Shabbat Shalom. They say have a good weekend. Because Shabbat is too religious. It's considered to be, that's what the religious people do. But most Israelis understand that, and even in most Israeli cities, in not Jerusalem or Bnei Brak, you can feel a difference. Friday afternoon, it's a time for people shut their businesses down. It is a day of rest. Unfortunately, people don't know the laws of Shabbat. They don't keep the laws of Shabbat, and they're not all going to shul or having a Dvar Torah at the meal. But Bezrat Hashem, we have to work in that direction so that, first of all, take care of ourselves. Make sure that our Shabbat that we celebrate is full of meaning and of course keeping the laws and enjoyment of the holiness of Shabbat, enjoyment which is associated, good types of enjoyment which don't violate any of the laws and don't take us out of the spirit of Shabbat. Okay, yeah.
Interesting. Just suddenly, the Turkey game.
Backgammon, backgammon, yeah. It's coming up. I think very soon. Can you play games? Yeah, it's a good question. Playing games on Shabbat is something we have to talk about. Where is it? Here. It's a section 13. It's another 10 pages. We'll get there. And not 8 pages. It's a good question. Similar question because it's a leisure activity. You enjoy playing games. Some of you have spent Shabbat with me. You know that we've played games. Right? Card games. Fine, I play special educational card games, so maybe it's special. But what if it's regular cards? What if you're playing poker? What if you want to play backgammon or chess? Is that allowed on Shabbat? So it's an interesting question. On the one hand, you're probably not violating any of the laws. You're moving a piece on a board. You're not setting it in. You're not writing, making letters. We talked about if you are making letters, it can be allowed if it's not set permanently in place. But what about the spirit? What about the spirit of Shabbat? That's our chapter. Should we skip there? Let's skip there. Let's go to page 141, 149, I think it is. Let's read about games on Shabbat. He says here, section 13. Yeah.
Reading is not a game.
Reading, that's another paragraph. We're going to talk about it. So let's do games and then we'll do reading. Okay, so games. Poskim disagree. You want to read, Yosef? You want to read for us?
Games on Shabbat. Poskim disagree whether one may play games on Shabbat. Some say that since Shabbat is meant for Torah study, one may not play games, as that would be wasting time that could be used to study Torah. Accordingly, one may not play checkers, chess, backgammon, billiards, or any ball game, whether the games are played inside on the floor or outside on a paved area. And since one may not play these games, they are considered muktzeh as well. Others maintain that there is no prohibition on playing games on Shabbat, as long as nobody is playing for money. Indeed, some rabbis would play chess on Shabbat, as it is a game that requires thought and sharpens the mind. In practice, it is appropriate for adults to be stringent on not to play board games, chess, and the like, both because it is prohibited according to some poskim, and because one should not to get used to neglecting Torah study on Shabbat. Those who wish to be lenient have an opinion on which rely. Children should also be trained to study Torah on Shabbat, but almost all poskim agree that one should not prevent them from playing games on Shabbat. In contrast, sports that are a big deal, like soccer, basketball, baseball, and football, may not be played on Shabbat because of the prohibition on weekday activities. It goes without saying that one may not play them on the court or field designated for them. Children may not play these sports either because it is a weekday activity.
Okay, so he's lenient for children to play games, and for adults, he says, there's some poskim allow it, some poskim say it's not it's a weekday activity. I think the common custom is, it really depends on the family. Some families really like games, board games. They play, Katan or Monopoly. When I grew up, we played Monopoly every Shabbat afternoon. That's how the parents get to sleep. The kids are busy by playing games.
But what is buying and selling?
But so that's another question. That's not for real money, right? Poker, for betting, that's, of course, you can't use money. It's mukta. But if it's fake money, some rabbis don't like it. And they say, this is it's a weekday activity, and you even have this fake money. But some say, it's fake money. It's not real money. It's just part of a game. And the game is allowed, especially for children. But for adults, there's some rabbis. I think it's more of an educational approach. You know, some rabbis say we should be studying Torah. We should train yourself to have a higher type of activity for the Shabbat, a more holy type of activity for Shabbat. So, but in some families, it's really common that even adults play games on Shabbat. And it doesn't take you out of the atmosphere of Shabbat. It's something which brings the family together. As the kids grow up, maybe they need less and less games to be able to sit around talk as adults. But when you have young children, one of the ways to bring the family together is by playing games together. And so the adults play with the children, and it's not prohibited per se. So it really depends on you. To answer your question, finally, Yisrael, if you want to play chess or checkers or backgammon, that you showed me, on Shabbat, because you need to relax a little bit, and you like the game, and it's fun for you, and you can't study all the time, especially here, we study all week long. We're studying all week long, so maybe on Shabbat we could take a little break. You need to, air out your brain a little bit sometimes with some of the easy leisure activities. I don't think it's prohibited to play backgammon on Shabbat. I don't want you to spend all day just having a backgammon tournament, but you're going to go to shul, you're going to eat, you're going to have the special meals, you're going to have the Torah reading, you're going to study some Torah. If you want to take a break for an hour and play some games, I think it doesn't really violate the spirit of Shabbat as much as, like we said before, going out to play a soccer game in the yard, on the pitch, going to play or putting on your shorts and going for a run. That's, I think, more of a violation of the spirit of Shabbat. But just playing some games inside the house with the family, I think that's, most poskim allow it, and it really depends on the culture. Reading, let's talk about reading material, okay?
All right.
Yes, please.
My question is, I understand the relax is good, but the game is talking about the strategy and the count. Is my question. And break the another malahot.
Good question. So let's think about. You're saying, is there any problem with selecting borer, right? Separating.
Yeah.
So you have to be aware when you're playing the game not to do the prohibition. What's the prohibition? To take something you don't want from a mixture, or you have to start with a mixture, and something that you don't want, to take it out and put it aside. That's not allowed. So any game which does that, that's not allowed. But most games have cards. You take the cards that you want, not the cards that you don't want. And you use your hand. You're not using a sifter. You're not using a special tool. So those are the three conditions we said for permitted separating, right? Ochel, bayad, umiyad. If you remember, you're taking out the good from the bad, and you're doing it for immediate use. The game, you're using it. That's why you're taking that card, or you're taking that piece, or whatever it is. It's because you want to use it now. So it's ochel, bayad, umiyad. So there's no problem of separating in most games. You don't separate off the bad ones. Usually, part of playing the game is you can choose this or that. But if you're following the rules, there's no problem of separating. What about counting? There's no problem counting. No problem counting. You can count on Shabbat. We're going to see that one of the sections here is about measuring with a measuring cup or a measuring stick or taking a ruler. That is a problem. But you usually don't measure precise in most games. But if you do, that could be a problem. So for example, when you cook, right, you fill up a measuring cup with 1 cup of flour or sugar. Can't do that on Shabbat. Well, you're not going to be cooking on Shabbat anyways. But even if you want to mix and make some kind of a salad dressing, which you are allowed to make on Shabbat, you're not allowed to use the measuring cup because that's not allowed. But if you're just counting, your cards or your pieces, or for the game, that's allowed. There's no prohibition on doing math. You're not allowed to sell and buy. We said commerce, but it's a game. Monopoly, you're buying and selling properties, right? So, but there are poskim that allow it at least for children, for sure. As it's clearly a game. It's not real money. It's not real commerce. Okay, does that answer the question? Reading. What are you supposed to read? Can you read materials? Let's move ahead. Before that, you asked me before about walking. Look on page 141. We left off in the middle of section 8, and we didn't complete it. We talked about playing sports. We talked about overexerting yourself for with a regimen. But and then we got into talking about ball playing. At the bottom, page 141 in section 8, it says one may walk on Shabbat. 141. The last paragraph says one may walk on Shabbat for one's health, on condition that he walks regularly and not more briskly or intensively than usual, right? So a regular walk for your health. It's good to take a walk. You're allowed to on Shabbat. It doesn't look like you're exercising. You're just doing a regular a Shabbat activity. Although one may not address medical needs on Shabbat since it is not discernible. I'm reading from the top of page 142. Since it is not discernible, it's not noticeable that his walking has a medical purpose. Many people take walks. He may walk for health and fitness on Shabbat. One may also do gentle stretches in order to loosen up, as I was saying before. The later poskim agree one may not ride a bicycle on Shabbat. Some maintain the reason for this prohibition is the concern that one will travel outside the tuchum. Others say that a concern is that the bicycle will break. They'll end up fixing it. In fact, the main reason is that it is a weekday activity since people ride bicycles primarily to travel, to work, or to exercise. So we don't. So this is about walking. Walking for your other affairs to go check out your farm or your business or if you're building a house, that's a problem. And we're going to skip ahead now to talking, and then we're going to get to reading in a second. Okay, so let's look at section 10. It's page 144. It's chapter 22, section 10. Talking. Just like we said, there's a way to walk on Shabbat and there's a way to not walk. Don't walk like you do on the weekdays. And we explained that was like, walking to look at your business activities or walking in a way which is not in the spirit of Shabbat, like exercising, working out. There's also talking. The same pasuk in Yeshayahu says, you're not supposed to walk in the regular way. You're not supposed to talk in the regular way in Shabbat. What does that mean? So the sages explain. Stephen, read a little bit, section 10.
It is mitzvah to honor Shabbat in a way one speak, as is written, and if you honor it and not go in your own way, no look to your own way, no speak of them. Yeshayahu 58:13. The sages elaborate, no speak of them. Your speech on Shabbat should not be like your speech on weekday, Shabbat 113a. This means that one should not speak on Shabbat about things that one may not do on Shabbat. Therefore, one should not say, tomorrow I will travel by car, I will write a letter, or I will buy an item. Really, then, it is prohibited for one to ask someone else to travel the next day on his behalf, write a letter for him, or buy something for him. Rule 307, verse 1. This prohibition applies to things that one intends to buy in the future. However, one may speak about what he has already done, as long as he does not intend to provide useful information to the listener. Best to perform the malakah. The prohibition applies to talking about action prohibited on Shabbat. In contrast, one may think about them, thus the sages expound. Speaking about the mundane matters is prohibited, but thinking about them is permitted.
It's actually, people know this line because it's part of one of the Zmirot Shabbat. Here hurimu tarimu l'shadecha banot, right? One of the Zmirot Shabbat has this line, here hurimu tarim. Thinking is allowed. You can think about anything you want, just not talking. Talking about mundane is prohibited. Okay, go ahead. Speech.
That merely allude to malakah is considered thinking and thus permitted. For example, while one may not say, tomorrow I will phone so and so, one may say, tomorrow I will speak with so and so, even though it is clear that he will do so by phone. Similarly, one may not say, tomorrow I will drive to Jerusalem, since traveling by motor vehicle is prohibited on Shabbat. But one may say, tomorrow I will go to Jerusalem, since one can go by walking, and even though Jerusalem is outside the Telechum. Theoretically, one could build a new route to Jerusalem, and he would be permitted to walk there on Shabbat. Since walking to Jerusalem is not fundamentally prohibited, one may talk about going there. Even if the listener realizes that the speaker means that he is planning to travel by car or bus, that the listener may join him if he wishes. The statement is still considered only a hint and is permitted. Similarly, if one plans to travel by cab on Shabbat, he may ask his friend, who is the cab driver, do you think you will be able to come over after Shabbat? Since he has not asked his friend to come with his cab in order to drive him, even though his friend understands that this is what is meant, it is not prohibited. However, he may not say to his cab driver friend, come over after Shabbat, please, because an illusion and imperative form is prohibited. Following the same principle, one who wishes to hire a worker on Sunday may say to him on Shabbat, I hope to see you on Sunday, but he may not say, please come on Sunday. Shabbat 150a, Rule 307. One may not speak about monetary transactions that have business implications, but one may talk about them if they have no practical import. Therefore,
Okay, so stop there for a second. So we talked about it a little bit, that This is a hard one. People talk, and you talk about what you care about, what you're busy with, and what your life is like. And part of our lives are commerce. Part of our life is travel. Part of our life is all sorts of mundane activities. And you got to be careful not to directly speak about prohibited things on Shabbat. But if it's just alluded to, and you're not directly speaking about, driving, you just talk about going instead of driving, then that's allowed. And I gave you my joke about how Jews do business on Shabbat, even though they shouldn't, and that they say we shouldn't talk about it. But how much did that new car cost you? And we shouldn't talk about it. But are you going to buy that new stock? So that's prohibited. It's really an abuse of the halacha. Of course, I'm not making light of it, but it is. Some people have trouble with it. We should try to be more careful, not to speak about mundane things on Shabbat. Your speech on Shabbat should not be like your speech on the weekdays. Now, what about if you're just shooting the breeze, just talking? Most people gather and they just, what do they talk about here in Israel? Politics. That's right. Did you hear what so-and-so said? And you're going to vote for so-and-so. And there's lots of, discussions about all sorts of current affairs. So he says here in the last paragraph in the section 10, it is preferable to minimize trivial conversations on Shabbat. One who enjoys such conversations may engage in them a bit more than usual, as they are part of his physical enjoyment of Shabbat. However, he should not indulge himself excessively, just as he should not eat or sleep excessively, as these indulgences will take away from the time he needs to set aside for Torah study on Shabbat. So it's hard to define, if it's not specifically a mundane activity, it's not a writing, it's not about commerce, it's not about muktzah, it's not about cooking or building. You're just talking about what's going on in the world. It's not explicitly prohibited, but doing too much of it is going to, some people doing any of it. My wife, if I start talking politics at all, say she doesn't enjoy it. Some people enjoy talking politics. So if you enjoy talking politics, it's not prohibited, but not too much. Not too much, because really you want to keep the spirit of Shabbat dedicated to more holy subjects. Of course, in Israel, many times politics is holy, because you want to make sure that the country is run by Torah, God-fearing Jews, and the politics. It's important what the Jewish country, whether they, the policy is like this or like that. That's also, a Torah subject. But of course, there are some which are more directly spiritual and some which are more mundane. The details of tax law are not necessarily, even though you could say, oh, that's this political party is for this type of taxation. The other one's against it. Well, that's all part of the Jewish state, but very quickly your Shabbat can turn into a board meeting instead of a holy gathering. So you got to be careful about that. Okay? Yes, please.
There's once I asked a friend. I asked him, you're renting this house. How much it costs you to rent this house? He said it's not allowed to mention the.
He's right.
Yeah.
He's right. Even though you say, well, renting a house in Israel is a mitzvah to settle the land, but and we saw that you're even allowed to tell a non-Jew to sign a contract if you're going to buy a house on Shabbat, because it's such an important mitzvah to settle the land. But so you might have a little more flexibility because of that. That's a high ideal of settling the land, but clearly, discussing prices and the cost of various things is considered to be mundane talk, which is not the right thing to talk about on Shabbat. Yeah, many times I have a specific neighbor that comes to us many times for Shabbat, and he likes to know prices of things and how much you paid and where. And I always have to say, Shabbat, I don't want to talk about prices. You know what he says? So how many apples does it cost? Wink, wink. Instead of saying shekels, we'll say apples. And then, I'm not talking about shekels. It's not. But everybody knows that's what you're talking about. So people have trouble with this, keeping the topic of conversation and keeping conversations without money in business. But it's really should be avoided. If the one allowance is, we're not going to read all of it now. In the next section, he says, if it's for the sake of a mitzvah, it can be allowed. He says, if you have to, you're arranging a wedding. Wedding's a big mitzvah. And you see someone who's a caterer, and you want to compare prices. It might be allowed because it's for the sake of a mitzvah. But we try to avoid it, the details. You could maybe talk about, get to know them, and see whether you like their style, and talk to them about what if someone's a photographer, so I like natural photography, or I like getting the special shots of the people conversation. That type of conversation is allowed for the sake of a mitzvah. But so that's where you can, and then people talk about education in kids. Well, schooling for your kids, that's a mitzvah. You have to teach them Torah. He's not having trouble with this teacher or that teacher. These are things that people talk about. And if it's for the sake of the mitzvah, it's allowed. But you have to be careful that it doesn't become just a weekday conversation too much, and you're getting into the details of wages. Or, technically, if it's for the sake of a mitzvah, you see someone who's you want to hire as a teacher of Torah in your school, you can. But if you say, I want to hire him as an accountant in my firm, I've been looking for an accountant. I see you speak Hebrew and English. Oh, and you're trained? Yeah. So you could say, well, I want to hire you and we'll offer you a good salary. No, that if it's not for the sake of a mitzvah, you can't. But if it's an accountant for a yeshiva, maybe you could say, well, it's for the sake of a mitzvah, I'm allowed to. So, but as I said, usually we try to avoid the figures of salaries. But you can talk, if it's for the sake of the mitzvah, you can talk about more, practical aspects of the mitzvah, because there is that allowance. Yeah. Oh.
In the house of the family, we talk only about Torah.
Wow.
Only.
Beautiful. That's ideal. However, I will say that even though the ideal is to only talk about Torah, what if there's somebody at the table who is bored because he's not trained to appreciate? Not you. You are a scholar. You're. What if somebody is there? What if there's a kid there who just, leaves the table very quickly because they're not talking about things that interest him, and he won't have a Shabbat meal? So there's a balance to find when you have a family, when you have different types of people. If everybody there is a yeshiva student and they love talking about Torah and discussing philosophy of Judaism and Tanakh, and let's think about what that means in the parsha a little bit more. Wonderful. But if you're going to lose the crowd and the people will not participate, so then you're shooting yourself in the foot. You sort of have to find a way to discuss things which will, give people have to enjoy themselves, have a good time, and find a way to connect it to Torah. Find a way, maybe some of the conversation can be Torah. In some families, they know that they're supposed to talk about Torah, but they're not really so well educated in Torah, and they're not really engaged in Torah study, and so they have the regular conversations. It's nice. They meet, they talk about family, they talk about, where they're going, what they saw, things they read on the internet, whatever people talk about. And then before the meal's over, okay, we're going to sing Shir Ma'alot, we're going to say Birkat HaMazon, and then they say, we didn't say a Dvar Torah. oh no, we didn't. Who has a Dvar Torah? Who can say some words of Torah? Which is very nice. It's better than nothing. So you should have some words of Torah at a Shabbat meal. It's good that they have that awareness. But really, it hurts me sometimes when I hear that, because that means that all of your conversations up to that has not been really too elevated, not too spiritual, not too connected. It's mundane. You were talking about, it could have been on Sunday or Monday. It's the same. And really, the entire conversation should be colored by it should be a Shabbat conversation, not a weekday conversation. And but not everybody's there. Not everybody is on such a high level like your family. Wow, it's beautiful, high level that they're only talking about Torah. That's a high level, and it's wonderful. But even if you're not, I do. And I'm not on such a high level. We talk about it, lots of different things. But I do try to make sure that there's a Torah conversation, not just at the end, before, just to fulfill our obligation to say a little idea. I try to make it part of the conversation of the Shabbat table, even earlier in the conversation. And discussing the Parsha is always a good thing. And kids sometimes come home from school, they're taught to discuss the Parsha, and they're waiting for their parents to ask them questions sometimes. What did you learn about Avraham, about Yitzchak? What did he do here? Why did he do that? And that's a lovely way of getting the kids involved and having a Torah conversation. But it's a challenge. Not everybody's ready for it. Yeah.
Sometimes the discussion is about Kuzari.
And you don't like it. You don't like it.
No, that not like my knowledge is there, but not at that level.
Yeah, right. It's hard to find the right. Sometimes, usually at a table, you have people on various levels. Some people are great scholars, and some people don't know the alphabet. So it's a challenge to get the appropriate level of discussion, so everybody can participate and feel comfortable and learn something and be elevated. And also, you got to throw in some Zmirot. You got to sing some songs too. So, and I want to sing a song today as well. Before we continue, make sure that we'll do Achenu. You want to bring out your violin for us. But we do have to talk about reading material. And I see there's a few other things. So let's make sure that we do our prayer first. And we'll probably continue this chapter tomorrow. It's a very long chapter, 22. So let's take a break for a moment and turn to page 231. 231, we should know it off by heart already.
Even
I saw a sign. Even you know it off by heart? Amazing, good. I saw a sign in this synagogue that because of the war going on, after every prayer, you have to say a passage of Tehillim. They don't tell you which one. Some places, the rabbi says, say this one. The rabbi says, say that one. They're very particular about it. You must say this passage of Tehillim. So people are looking for that guidance. They don't know. But this synagogue, they left it open. Any passage of Tehillim is fine. Choose one and say it. But then they had Achenu. They had the words, this little prayer for our brethren. It does mention people who are in distress and in captivity, and we hope maybe today we'll have some good news. I have hope that yesterday there was a big rally in Washington D.C. They say over close to 300,000 Jews gathered. This is the biggest gathering ever in America of Jews, and to show their solidarity with Israel. It's very beautiful. Wonderful. So people are coming together also to fight anti-Semitism, which they're feeling in America and everywhere else in the world. And so those are the three themes were support for Israel, fight anti-Semitism, and the third theme, which is everybody can get behind, is to pray for the captives, to show support that we want to get them free as soon as possible. Okay. You ready? Achenu kol beit Yisrael, Achenu kol beit Yisrael, amet למדוני בצרה, בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. אחינו כל בית ישראל, אחינו כל בית ישראל, למדוני בצרה, בצרה ובשביה, העומדים בין בים ובין ביבשה. המקום ירחם, ירחם עליהם ויוציאם מצרה, ירווחה ויפל עליהם ושיבוא לגאולה השתה בגלה ובזמן כבמרים. המקום ירווחה עליהם ויוציאם מצרה, ירווחה ומייפל עליהם ושיבוא לגאולה השתה בגלה ובזמן כבמרים. יפה, יפה, thank you. Okay, turn the page, one more page, and we'll try to drill it into you. This one's the happier one. See you, Sha'arim. You see where it is? On page 233. The words start here. Se'u Sha'arim. Se'u. Se'u. That's Se'u. I know it looks like a shin, but it's a sin. Se'u Sha'arim.
Here.
Rashechem. No. Underneath my finger. Se'u Sha'arim Rashechem. Se'u Sha'arim Rashechem. Okay? And then the high part, we skip to the last line. The last line starts over here. Mi ze melech hakavod. Mi hu ze. Me, over here. Underneath my finger.
Okay.
Mi hu ze melech hakavod. That's the second part. First part, it starts over here. Se'u, underneath my finger. That's where we're going to start now. And then we're going to skip to that other last line. Okay, ready? Se'u she'arim rashechem v'nasu pitchei olam talai lai lai ve'yavo melech hakavod hakavod sela. Se'u she'arim rashechem v'nasu pitchei olam talai lai lai ve'yavo melech hakavod hakavod sela. Mi ze melech hakavod Hashem tzevakot hu melech Hashem tzevakot hu melech hakavod sela. Mi ze melech hakavod Hashem tzevakot hu melech Hashem tzevakot hu melech hakavod sela. Se'u she'arim rashechem v'nasu pitchei olam talai lai lai ve'yavo melech hakavod hakavod sela. Lai 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 la 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 lai lai la 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 lai lai da 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 da. Yafe. And the one I taught you yesterday is on page 100. Ki lo yitosh Hashem, ki lo yitosh Hashem amo. Page 119, third last line. Ki lo yitosh Hashem amo, v'nachalato lo ya'azov. Ki lo yitosh Hashem, ki lo yitosh Hashem amo. Ki lo yitosh Hashem amo, v'nachalato lo ya'azor. Last line. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Melech Ya'aneinu, b'yom koreinu. Dum pam 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 pam. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Melech Ya'aneinu, b'yom koreinu. Ki lo yitosh Hashem, ki lo yitosh Hashem amo. Ki lo yitosh Hashem amo, v'nachalato lo ya'azor. Ki lo yitosh Hashem, ki lo yitosh Hashem amo. Ki lo yitosh Hashem amo, v'nachalato lo ya'azor. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Melech Ya'aneinu, b'yom koreinu. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Hashem Hoshea, Melech Ya'aneinu. Hashem Ya'aneinu, b'yom koreinu. Yefeh. Okay. Shikoach. Okay, thank you, Idan. Accompaniments. Beautiful. All right. Now, let's answer Binyamin's question about reading material on Shabbat. Page 147. 147 in the Pninei Halacha, it's chapter 22, section 12. Permitted and forbidding reading material. Okay, you want to read it for us, Binyamin? Read a little bit? That's right. Get the right glasses. Oh, those are the Hebrew glasses. Wait, they go from right to left. Okay.
Oh yes. Here.
Yeah.
Permitted and forbidden reading material. One may not read, construct, and find documents on Shabbat, such as loan and purchase contracts, bank statements, phone and electric bills, and price or in the shop windows.
Thank you. So, first of all, what's prohibited to read? You're not allowed to read financial documents. And from the last one, what did he say? Flyers with prices. What do we call that? Advertisements. Advertisers say, here's a deal, $10 for this radio. You're not allowed to read that on Shabbat. It's forbidden reading material. Reading them is considered dealing with mundane affairs, cheftzei chol, which is forbidden on Shabbat. Furthermore, there's a concern that as a result of reading them, one will end up writing. Sometimes you want to circle. Oh, this is a good ad, or we're reading your bank statement. Ooh, why is that debit there, or what or who So you're not allowed to read financial documents on Shabbat. It's a big challenge, the truth is, because sometimes you get newspapers designed for the Bet Knesset. You know what I'm talking about? These little journals, pamphlets, where they have a little nice word on the Parsha, and in the corner, they have an advert for, I don't know, even if they're selling tzitzit, for only 100 shekels, or sometimes they just advertise anything. A cruise to the Caribbean for only 1,000 euros. You're not allowed to read the advertisements on Shabbat, or at least not the prices. So you can read about the tzitzit, but not how much it costs. But that's how they're designed to get you to read everything. So it's a real problem. You must read only. You can read the Divrei Torah, but not the advertisements. So some rabbis say, not allowed in my shul. All these newspapers. Sure, it's for the Divrei Torah, but then look at what about all the advertisements that people are reading? That's not allowed. So you're making people. But on the other hand, people say, well, that's interesting. Otherwise, they're just going to fall asleep. But these Divrei Torah, they're written by, celebrities or people that, they have an interesting story. They're very well done. Sometimes they have games for the kids in there. They have trivia questions. They have public interest stories, and they're done really well. So the rabbis are torn. On the one hand, we want people to be engaged. They don't know how to study Torah. They don't know how to pick up a Talmud. They don't know, sometimes even they're not used to studying on their own. But these newspapers, they read them. They read them. They're written well. They're interesting. They're made interesting, like for the layman, for the common folk. So maybe we should allow it. But then there's the problem that there's the advertisements. So really, it's a toss-up. Some people say, okay, well, there's another problem. We'll allow it because we want people to learn the Torah in these newspapers. But then they'll say, but you go to a shul and you see everybody with their siddur, but on top of the siddur, they have a newspaper. They're not davening. They're reading it. So they say, okay, we'll give them out only after shul's over. And then take them home, read them at home. It's better than they read the regular newspaper. They should read a Torah newspaper. But it's an issue. But reading material, it shouldn't stop you from davening or interfere with the davening. And you're not allowed to read the financial pages. We'll see more. He continues to write that what about something in the middle? Let's the next paragraph, we're going to skip one paragraph, go to one may not read run-of-the-mill secular material and stories if they have no value. However, one who enjoys reading them may do so occasionally. Sages do not forbid reading for pleasure on Shabbat. What's forbidden is financial material or business material or things which have to do with, but if you're reading a novel, for example, maybe you're allowed to. He says, in contrast, one should not read gripping novels that cause sadness or anxiety on Shabbat. It would seem that one may read depressing stories from Jewish history or rabbinic biography since they are valuable as Torah and are morally edifying. Nevertheless, it's preferable to study pleasant things which are more appropriate for Shabbat. Here, it's hard to define. You can see that it's a fine line. Well, I enjoy reading this novel, even though it's not about Torah. It's just about people and where they went and what they saw and their conversations. There's nothing prohibited about it, but if you spend your whole Shabbat reading a book, where's the Torah? Where's the spirituality? Where's the holiness? So don't get drawn into your book. But it's better than, of course, we really have to, as educators and living in the modern world, we have to realize the big challenge is people are used to nowadays screens and entertainment which has video. And you're already pushing people to say, don't go on any electronics on Shabbat. So, okay, fine, so I'll read a book. Then you say, no, don't read that book, it's not holy enough. Like pushing people to the edge. They're not used to studying. So we have to figure out what's the best, is it better that they watch TV or better that they read a book? Better that they read a book. It's better than they read a Torah book than they read a mundane book, but it's better than nothing. And so it depends, on the circumstances. That's not the first thing that I would chastise people as, you're not keeping Shabbat because you're reading a novel. If you go to shul and you have a Shabbat meal and then you rest a little bit and you want to read a little bit of your fiction, I don't think it's prohibited. But obviously, and if you only have one day off, if you every other day you're busy with business and you have no time to read, and this Shabbat is your one day to read, some people actually do read a book every Shabbat. And that's, it's not something that's prohibited in essence. It's a question of the spirit of Shabbat. Okay, next paragraph is what everybody's asking themselves. And, here in Israel, in America, there's the big, the New York Times edition is the biggest one? No, not too many Americans here, but the New York Times is like the biggest, most important newspaper in America. And they have there's a special magazine attached to the paper on which day? On Sunday. So the Sunday New York Times, it's like double the size, triple the size. There's a special editions. Sunday's the big day. In Israel, there's no Sundays. So which is the day where the newspaper is bigger and more, with many more articles and many more advertisements too. But it's a lot more interesting, and they have all sorts of supplements. It's Fridays. Fridays, they sell more newspapers than every other day during the week. During the week, most people don't have time to read newspapers anymore, and who reads a written newspaper? Now we have internet. But there is still newspapers that are bought and sold every day, but primarily it's for Friday afternoon. And then it's called the Shabbat edition, because they don't work on Shabbat. They don't produce a newspaper on Shabbat, most places. But they do produce it for Friday. People buy it on Friday, and then they enjoy it on Shabbat. Many people, you know what their Shabbat looks like? You wake up late, drink a cup of coffee, and you read the newspaper. Can you do that on Shabbat? Okay, let's say I'll skip the ads. Let's say you don't look at the advertisements. What is a newspaper full of? There's sports, entertainment, politics, business. It's not all prohibited. So that's what he says here on page 147 at the last paragraph. In principle, one may read the newspaper for informative content. One who enjoys reading news, stories, and analysis may do so, right? There's columnists that analyze, why this person went there, why the government said like that. It's analysis of politics. You're allowed to do if you enjoy that, but one may not read sad or worrying content on Shabbat. One may even read, he says, general financial articles as long as they do not give practical advice. But one may not read articles that give practical business or investment advice. It's forbidden to read the advertisements for products that one may wish to buy in the future. So therefore, he says on the last two lines, even though technically one may read parts of the newspaper, many maintain that it is proper to avoid reading it on Shabbat because it is full of advertisements and disturbing news, right? Usually what sells is the bad news. It's difficult to distinguish between what one may and one may not read. Additionally, at the top of page 148 now, reading a newspaper negates the main purpose of Shabbat, which is Torah study. Therefore, one may read its informative content and non-disturbing news, but only while in the bathroom. He says, there you can't study Torah anyways. So the truth is, some people say you shouldn't bring Israeli newspapers into the bathroom because they're written in Hebrew. Mm-hmm. There's Hebrew holy letters on it, but the common custom is allowed. Most of the newspapers don't have God's name in it. They don't have psukim in it. And if they did, they weren't published for the sake of holiness. They're just part of the newspaper. So you can bring them into the bathroom. But don't turn your Shabbat into a day of just catching up on the news and reading newspapers all day. Newspapers can be. There was some rabbis in some communities. They say absolutely forbidden. You're not allowed to read newspapers whatsoever. And there was an uproar, I think, in one of these communities when they published a book about the great holy Netziv of Volozhin. And in the book, it wrote about him. He was in Europe, one of the great rabbis. He said one of his biggest pleasures on Shabbat was reading the newspaper. He meant the Jewish newspapers, because he found out what's going on in this community, what they're discussing. Those Jewish newspapers were a lot more holy than the regular newspapers we read. But it did say, black on white, in his book, that the Netziv, one of his enjoyments of Shabbat was reading the newspaper. And they're trying to educate their community. No newspapers on Shabbat, it's all forbidden. And then the Rosh Yeshiva is reading the newspaper. So they had to actually recall the book. They actually they were so upset that it's hurting their entire educational venture. So they recalled the book. There was a few other problematic things that people didn't like about the Rosh Yeshiva. It's a big problem when you censor your own leaders. But anyways, it's a little bit of a political hot spot also. I talked about playing ball on Shabbat and now reading newspapers. Some communities just like verboten. It's the national sport is reading newspapers. Exactly, the news, right? So anyways, you have to be careful about reading material. What's prohibited, of course, is, financial stuff and business. But if it's just analysis and, discussions, commentary, that's it's allowed. There's nothing forbidden about it, but just don't make it your entire Shabbat and waste your time with Shabbat. We have to stop here. Zod Hashem will continue with more examples of how to keep the spirit of Shabbat. Chapter 22, we'll hopefully finish it tomorrow for the end of the week. And just a few more topics to cover next week about Shabbat, and then we'll get into Hanukkah. Be'ezrat Hashem. Okay.